Hi there. Thanks for having me. My name is Santamaria, and I am a developer advocate at Pulumi. And I'm here today to talk to you about a fallacy or a logical inconsistency that I see currently with some DevOps shops. And that's the idea of a generalists-only mindset. Let's explore why. Right now, I see some groups deciding that because they have a lot of processes and tools and things like that, they can just have a group of people, typically maybe even a small group of people, owning everything on a project. So they do all of the development, they do all of the security, they do all of the operations, they do all of the QA. Everything about it is owned by a small group of people who are basically generalists. And to me, it kind of doesn't work. The logical inconsistency here is that people can learn everything well. No one can actually really do that. That's not something that our brains are hardwired to be able to handle. Instead, we sit here and we learn one thing or a few things well, and then we expand our knowledge to other things to be able to do them. So how did we end up in this scenario? How did we get to this point where people are thinking, oh, well, if I adopt this process and I just have this group of generalists, it's just going to work? What's the problem with that culture? Well, sometimes we see it because people take a look at startups and go, oh, well, that startup was successful. You just have to find the right people who can know everything and do everything. That doesn't exactly work. In a startup, you do that because you have to, not because it's a good idea. You have to keep your costs low, so you can only hire maybe 2 people. And suddenly they have to build the whole thing. When you get to larger organizations, that whole culture starts to fall apart. And so that's really a spot where some startups fail because they don't realize that they need to start specializing. But really, I think the biggest reason that we have gotten here is that having a group of generalists in one room just kind of getting something done is a lot easier than solving the situations that get us to the point of a good culture. So solving the communication problems, solving the empathy issues, solving any trust issues amongst the organization. So instead, we just try something different. Throw money at the problem by hiring somebody that supposedly can fix everything, instead of realizing that a good team of specialists is going to be able to help. So the idea is that when no one is an expert, it's not that suddenly everyone becomes an expert. No, it still is the case that no one is the expert. No one actually knows everything about how something works. So one of the problems that comes up is your duct tape solutions. We've all been there. Something's broken, we have to get it fixed. We want to go home for the evening. So you look something up on Stack Overflow. You go through and just read what everybody else has done. Oh, somebody says to run this command. And rather than knowing what that command does, maybe you just do it and it works. And you go, okay, it's fixed. It's all done. This is the trap of the generalist, in the sense that you don't understand why something worked. You don't understand how to make it happen, not happen again. So this duct tape solution scenario is pretty common when you start looking at this generalists-only mindset. Instead of having people who understand why something is the way it is and who can do it properly when they get the time. I'm not saying that we don't do duct tape solutions when we don't have time. Sometimes we do. But eventually we come back and deal with that technical debt. And we try to fix it. We try to make it better. So that's one example of why this generalist mindset doesn't really solve anything, no matter how many tools you have, no matter how many processes you put in place, and no matter how much automation you use. The duct tape solutions still are there, and it's better to be able to figure it out as a team. In addition, those duct tape solutions lead to failures down the line. Whether that's because, well, it worked right now and then the next day a new dependency updates and everything breaks because you didn't know that that could happen. That's a failure. And it's human error, which is natural. But when you're a generalist and you're trying to find your way through what you have, then sometimes these failures do happen. Now, when you have these failures and you have these duct tape solutions, what does that lead to? Well, a lack of time. When you have all of these generalists trying to work on a problem, they're going to spend a lot of time researching. They don't know the history of why something is the way it is. They don't really know where to look. And it's not a failing. It's what happens when you might specialize in one thing, but you have to expand your knowledge to cover everything and somehow know it to some depth of knowledge that you don't actually have. Things take time to figure out how do you get there. So all of these things together reduce the velocity of your organization, which is the complete opposite of what we're trying to do with DevOps. Instead of breaking down silos, we try to smush people together and say, you're going to just go do it all together, and then reduce the velocity, increase the silos, because you end up with people who think they know more, I guess, than what they do, or they end up with they have to know more than what they actually do. And so they suddenly become their own little siloed organization, their own little DevOps shop. But there's another way. So let me talk to you a little bit about why I think we should move away from this situation and move back to having teams of specialists working together. So, how do we get there? Well, let's go back to specialization. No more single people having all of the knowledge of an organization. No more Brents. When you think about it, there's always that classic mantra of there's no I in team. If you have these generalists who have to be able to do everything, how can they work as a team? Sure, they can do some collaboration together, but really they have to gather all of this knowledge to themselves. And suddenly you have a team of people who have all of this knowledge, kind of, and it's harder and harder to bring in new ideas. It's harder and harder to say that here's a specialist with this experience and then bring them in and try to help fix something. You run into a rut. So the reason that specialists are helpful is that they have experience, a wide breadth of experience in their specialization that they're bringing to the table. They have history to understand why you might have this library and you have to use it in this way because the last time someone used it that way, it broke. This was kind of the argument with Docker within Docker. People keep trying it. People keep trying to make it happen. Some people do better than others, but those pitfalls show up again and again and again and again when people keep trying it. So this history that people can bring, put together with the experience that they have, then helps them explain why something happens and why things need to happen in certain ways. So why do we use this library this way? Why is this security concern important? Why do you put a load balancer here? All of those things are answered the more experience and history that you have. The other thing that having a team of specialists can help with in this kind of a culture is making sure that you don't deal with the champagne factor as badly. Now, people call it the bus factor. Someone recently told me, try calling it the champagne factor instead. Basically, they won the lotto, they break open a bottle of bubbly, and they don't come back the next day. So that's the champagne factor, same idea as the bus factor. But the reason that it's actually important to think about it this way is that when you have a group of specialists, they all share some kind of background, some experience levels and history, so they build things in a certain way. They do things in a certain way. so that when that one person leaves, it's a lot easier to hire someone else in with similar experience or similar history, however that might be, whatever they've studied in school or studied in real life by doing it. That experience and history coupled together with the why means that they can come in, take a look at what someone else did, and go, I understand that, and catch up very quickly. You have less of this specialized organizational knowledge that you then have to deal with later. Instead, you have people who can come in, pick it up, and keep moving. So it helps increase that velocity that we're looking for when we bring a DevOps culture to an organization. Finally, the thing I want to mention is this idea of we have T-shaped people. So that's where you have a breadth of knowledge that you might be kind of spreading out over many things, but you have one thing that you know extremely well. So that's the depth of knowledge. So it makes a T in terms of your knowledge. You might hear that in different organizations. You'll hear cone-shaped people, which are people who have that breadth of knowledge and a couple of different wells of experience. But really, when you think about it, we are people-shaped people. Not T-shaped, not cone-shaped. We bring our own unique experience and unique history to everything we do. So this person that might have a similar skill set to this person over here, both of them might look on paper like, oh, hey, this is a T-shaped person. But the experiences that this person has and the experiences that this person has are both different. And so what happens is that we have people-shaped people coming together to build something greater than themselves. That is the promise of a DevOps culture, is coming together from the very beginning and sharing our knowledge and sharing our experiences, whatever those unique things are, to build something big, to increase velocity, to make these processes better, to make our product a better thing. Now, I might be painting this in a lovely spot where, oh, well, if you bring specialists back in your organization, it's going to work. If you avoid this logical pit, it's going to be perfect. Sounds like a lot of people trying to sell you a tool, right? Well, I'm not here to say it's perfect. There are hard things. And those are the things we need to address, because I think this is where we end up in this logical fallacy of having a generalist-only mindset. First things first, the hardest thing to do when you have a table of specialists all with different concerns is communication. Let's say you have a dev at the table, a ops person at the table, a QA person at the table, and a security person at the table. And I'm keeping it simple. So yes, there are more people at the table, but let's just keep to these four for a moment. Let's say the dev wants to use a very specific library. The ops team is groaning because that has a memory leak. The QA team is not happy because every time they use this library, there's a lot more work they have to do, and testing doesn't really work very well, so the quality goes down. Security is screaming because there's a CVE, a fairly major one, on that library. How do you deal with all this communication? If you're the manager sitting at the head of the table, it's hard. If this were generalists, everybody kind of has about the same amount of knowledge and decides to move forward together and just makes it happen. But when you have these specialists at the table, how do you bridge that communication gap? Well, the first thing is making sure everyone has the tools that they need to say, this is what I need, and this is why it's important to me. So it might be pausing the conversation and encouraging someone to speak up more. Say, why is that important? Try to figure out how to help that person say, I need to do better. If you're that person at the table, let's say you're the ops person, how are you going to articulate that this memory leak is a large problem for you, because it means that you're constantly on call, you're constantly being called in? It's okay to communicate your need. That communication then also ties in with the next hard problem, which is empathy. Empathy is not sympathy. A lot of people get this confused. Sympathy is the idea that, oh hey, I've had a similar experience. I remember how that felt. Therefore, I can sympathize with you. I can remember that feeling. That's different from empathy, which is where you put yourself in someone else's shoes and say, I can imagine what it's like being in your shoes. I'm going to sit with it for a moment and think about, what are your thought processes? What emotions are you feeling? What problems are you dealing with? And what is your unsaid need in this case? In the case of the people around the table, they might empathize with one another by saying, why is it so important to you? Maybe you have deadlines to hit that aren't as part of this discussion. Maybe it's a scenario where you don't want to be on call, you want to go be with your kids. Maybe it's a scenario of, I need to reduce the number of CVEs so that we get our bonus this month. Anything like that could be happening at the table. Being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand where they're coming from is a really big key to making that DevOps culture work. So as the manager sitting at the head of the table, maybe you're sitting there trying to figure out how to draw out that need, how to make someone see it from someone else's point of view. Using those skills that you hopefully have gained as a manager to say, so-and-so ops person, talk to me a little bit more about that memory leak. If this happens, what does that look like for you? That's the kind of communication you need. Once you've dealt with some of that communication and empathy, we deal with the hardest problem of all, which is trust. The more that you don't actually meet people where they are, negotiate, and live up to those negotiations, the more trust erodes in an organization. So the idea behind a good DevOps culture, where we build everything together and we break down these silos typically get built up partially because there's a lack of trust between teams. So how do you break that down? Well, you come to the table, you communicate, you ask, how can I help you? How can I make everything work better together? Can I put myself in your shoes? And can I communicate what my needs are to you? And then can we negotiate? Once you start that negotiation and you come to a compromise, maybe you decide to use this library with the promise that you're going to deal with that technical debt in a month. Then go meet it. Make sure everybody knows what's happening. Keep those lines of communication open. Keep talking. Keep making sure it all works out. The more you do that, the more you build trust. This isn't easy. It's not something that just happens. You need to work at it. You need to work at a good DevOps culture and build up that trust over time. So I encourage you, think about that logical fallacy as you look around at your organization. Are you going down that rabbit hole? Instead, let's build up good DevOps cultures. Let's be a team again. I'll be right here on Discord to answer any of your questions, and I can't wait to hear from you. Thank you so much for having me.